The gunman's name was Roy Marley, alias John Mason. He was born in Tasmania in 1909 and began a career in crime early. He was still a teenager when he first fell afoul of the law. He was convicted of larceny in July 1924 and ordered to make restitution. On the 13th of July 1926, he was charged with assault for having punched one Richard Lumsden in the face. He seems to have escaped penalty for that, but was sentenced to 1 month's imprisonment on the 6th of August for being unlawfully on premises. The following year, Marley, who was unemployed and spent his time wandering the streets and frequenting billiard halls, was found in a building where a number of gas meters had been robbed. On a charge of robbery, he was jailed for 3 months. Soon after being let out of jail on the 8th of October 1927, Marley was with two mates named Herbert Mariner and Walter Butterworth in West Hobart, when an orchardist named Joseph Preston Cato saw them picking flowers from gardens as they walked along, and overheard them swearing, and complained to them about it. Their response was to attack him and rob him of a watch valued at £5. At their trial in December, it was revealed that Cato, who was a champion amateur boxer in his youth, had told the young men to stop where they were. One of the three asked Cato what business of his it was, and Cato invited one of them to fight with him. Mariner and Marley both took the offer, and then Butterworth joined in, and they knocked Cato unconscious. The judge stopped the prosecution, saying that Cato had started the quarrel and had gotten the worst of it, and a nolle prosequi was entered. In September 1928, Marley was once again before the courts accused of vagrancy. It was said he wandered the streets with undesirables and had done no work for 2 or 3 months. The case was dismissed when a Salvation Army officer promised to keep the defendant under observation and find him employment. December the 26th, 1928, found the 19-year-old Marley at the Bluebird billiard room in Hobart. About 11:30 a.m, a man named Tasman Rogers, who was looking after the premises for the owner, had told another player, named Pelham, he got into an argument with, to cut it out or get out. Pelham struck him and walked away. Marley stopped playing and went up, reaching over another man's shoulder and punched Rogers in the jaw. The man fell and hit his head on the floor. Rogers' next memory was waking up in the hospital. Marley said that Pelham was crippled and he saw Rogers hit Pelham twice and he was not going to see him pushed around. He claimed he pushed Rogers away, not punched him, and that it was an accident the man was knocked out cold. When the prosecutor began cross-examining Marley, he made an error and asked questions tending to show Marley guilty of some other offence, contrary to the Evidence Act. Marley's lawyer pounced on the mistake, and the case was dismissed. By October 1929, Tasmanian authorities were tired of Roy's antics. Found guilty of receiving some clothing material from the robbery of a tailor's shop, he was sentenced to 14 days' imprisonment, with the sentence suspended, provided that he left the state within 2 weeks. If he did leave, he didn't stay away long. On December the 30th, 1931, Marley allegedly broke into a store at Bothwell and stole money and cheques to the value of £287. 200 notes had been sent to the business from the ES&A Bank, numbered 365801 to 366000, on the 18th of December. Some of the money from the robbery was discovered in his possession, which he claimed he won at the horse races on the 19th of December. Although there was suspicion, there was not proof that Marley had been involved, and the charge was dismissed. On the weekend of the 6th and 7th of February 1932, HMAS Australia was docked at Hobart. Brawls and other altercations took place between sailors and locals. Importantly for Marley, it is the first time he was known to have had a gun in his possession. He told police he was chased by a body of sailors late at night and was forced to fire 4 shots at them to enable his escape. On the 17th of February, Marley and 25-year-old William Anning, a baker and former policeman, broke into the state public buildings with intent to steal. They gained access by forcing a window in the judge's department. Once inside, they moved one safe and upended another in the office of the sheriff and registrar of the Supreme Court, and opened it from the bottom. The duo had left a car running outside for their getaway. Sergeant Gianni found the vehicle and turned the engine off. Anning and Marley appeared from a yard, neither of them wearing boots. Gianni approached and grabbed Anning, whereupon Marley punched the policeman in the head and face. A constable came running to assist, and Anning announced he would go quietly. Marley had no such thoughts, and struck Constable Atkinson with a piece of iron before being overpowered. Anning was found to have a wrench and a chisel in his pocket. Marley had an electric torch and a notebook with the licence plate number of the car written on it. The car had been stolen on the 15th of February. The pair then broke into Harris and Marsh's ironmonger's warehouse on the 12th of March, around 2:20 a.m. Marley and Anning were seen near the building and were followed to Anning's home by police. Once at home they kept checking to see if anybody was watching, and although they may not have realised it, police were watching the house. Although they had not been seen in the building, they were later arrested on suspicion. A fingerprint found on the safe in Harrison Marsh's matched Anning, despite his attempt while in custody to spoil the fingerprinting by cutting part of his index and middle fingers off, which he claimed was an accident which had occurred before his arrest. Detective Smith stated the injury was not there at Anning's arrest. Anning's wife backed her husband up and even melodramatically flourished a blood-stained handkerchief said to have bandaged his hand in court at his committal. The pair were released on bail, but when they attended the police station to report on the 2nd of May 1932, they were rearrested. Two young solicitors, called Max Sorrell and Gavin Crisp, were charged with receiving postal notes to the value of £20 16 shillings, which they knew were stolen. The notes had been stolen from post offices in South Hobart and Denali on the nights of the 20th of April and the 21st of April. The people said to have blown the safes and committed those robberies were Anning and Marley, using stolen cars for their getaways. In addition to the postal notes, they took amounts of money in silver and banknotes. A keen-eyed postal employee noticed a postal note being cashed had been stamped with the word tax, as it should have been, but the T was slightly slanted. It was later discovered that an engraver had made a duplicate of the post office stamp, but had made a mistake with that letter. Crisp and Sorrell claimed they were innocent. The notes had been given to them in payment for defending Marley and Anning in the court cases relating to the March break-ins. At their trial in July 1932, both men were found not guilty. This was no doubt to the relief of Gavin's father, Judge Harold Crisp, later Chief Justice of Tasmania. On the 3rd of May, Marley and Anning appeared in court and explained their lawyer, Mr. Crisp, could not defend them as he was under arrest himself. They had engaged two new lawyers and were granted time for the men to familiarise themselves with the case. In court on the charge of breaking into the state public buildings, they explained they'd been out drinking until late. As Anning was a baker, he had to start work early, so it wasn't much point to go home. Instead, they sought a spot in the yard next to the building to sleep, but heard a window broken and feared being accused, so tried to quietly leave the area, when the police attacked them. The tools they had with them were for Marley's motorcycle. Unsurprisingly, both were found guilty after the jury retired for just 15 minutes. When being sentenced, Marley asked for leniency, saying he had just been married and had a widowed mother. He had a touch of tuberculosis and gave to charity whenever possible. He offered to leave the state if given the chance to do so. The judge replied that he could not overlook Marley's record dating back to 1924. He added that any treatment he received in prison for his condition would be better for his health than breaking into places at night. Then both men were given 2-year sentences. On the 11th of May, having been found guilty of breaking into Harrison Marsh's warehouse, they were given 3 years, to begin once they had served the 2 years for the previous conviction. The judge said that the pair were leaders of a gang carrying out crimes in Hobart, and a tough sentence was needed to put a stop to the activity. Marley decided to appeal, and luck was on his side. The full court, with one dissenting opinion, found that evidence was allowed in the trial, which should not have been. The conviction was quashed. Marley was accused of bashing a man he had been drinking with in a lane in June 1934 and stealing his wallet, but again the case was dismissed. Evidently his lifestyle had become too much for his wife Molly, who filed for divorce at the same time. The next month something occurred. Whether related to his pending divorce or not is unknown. Marley was found with abrasions to his head and knee outside the Theatre Royal in Hobart early on the morning of the 15th of July. He was taken to hospital, where he said he'd been hit on the head with a bottle. He left hospital the next day. The next incident in Marley's life we know about was having threatened to bomb his father-in-law and blow up his house. He went and threw a rock through one of the windows in the early hours of the 15th of November, 1934. His father-in-law, a waterside worker named Leslie Milburn, sought police protection from Marley. Marley had been taken to the police station and searched for a revolver 3 times. Milburn said he had claimed that Marley had been carrying a kosh, not a gun, when he reported him. Although he didn't want to see Marley taken to jail, he wanted him to leave him and his daughter alone, stating that in 4.5 years of marriage he had paid his daughter's bills, not Marley. Stanley Milburn, Roy's brother-in-law, had been returning home at 12:40 a.m. and heard the glass shatter when the stone was thrown, and recognised Marley, but had been unable to catch him. Marley then attempted to reconcile with his wife, whom he had barely lived with since their marriage, and who, according to her father, was close to a nervous breakdown, by meeting her on the 9th of January 1935 and punching her in the face. That done, he pulled a picket off a fence and threatened to smash the nose of her face with it. He was fined for breaking the window and for assaulting his wife. Also in January 1935, a man named Jack Anderson had been seen talking to Marley near the Commercial Bank shortly before he presented a forged order for £475. He denied the man was Marley, who was never charged in relation to that matter. Marley was fined for committing a nuisance on the 12th of April and then spent a while in hospital. Almost as soon as he emerged, he and a woman named Hazel Venn were arrested for robbery with violence, having stolen £4 10 shillings from a man called Alan Steer. On the 29th of April, Marley was working in a quarry when he was injured by a rockfall which hit him on the back and hands, one thumb being badly torn. He was conveyed to hospital and operated on. This caused him to miss the hearing scheduled for the 30th of April in relation to the robbery charge. Bitterness with his wife continued. Seeing her on her way home from a cabaret on the night of the 24th of May, he went up and vowed he would get her. Molly went straight to the police and was given an escort home. The adjourned robbery case was heard in July. Steer said he was driving at 3:30 p.m. when 2 women flagged him down and asked for a ride as it was raining. He obliged, and Marley, who he thought must be the husband of one of the women, got in also. The suggestion was made to go to a hotel and buy some ale, which was done. Then Marley told Steer to drive to the Domain in a threatening manner. There, Marley and Venn went behind the car for a while. Steer eventually got out and asked them to come along. As he turned, Steer was hit by the butt of a revolver and staggered forward. Then he was punched and kicked and lost consciousness. He woke some time later 50 yards from the car where one of the women was asleep. His money had been taken while he was out. When he was found guilty, Marley reacted with an outburst, slamming his fist down on the rail of the dock, and pointing at a member of the jury, he yelled out, "I didn't expect justice with that man on the jury. I only punched his boy the other day. It's his way of getting even." Calling him a menace to society, Judge Harold Crisp sentenced Marley to 3 years, and then to be held for an indeterminate period in a reformatory. Marley waved cheerily to his supporters in the court, saying he'd see them at Christmas. Marley appealed, claiming prejudice during the trial. Unlike the previous occasion, this time the majority decision dismissed his appeal. On the 20th of July 1936, his divorce was finalised. In July 1937, he had a conviction recorded for fighting while in Hobart Jail. Released from prison early, Marley decided to leave Tasmania and went to Sydney in 1938 to seek his fortune through insurance fraud. Marley had obtained work on the wharves, and while employed there made separate claims under his own name, that of his brother, Maurice Marley, as William Mitchell, and as Victor Coleman, for the partial amputation of his left thumb, which had occurred in 1935. He used a razor to slice off extra wads of flesh for his fraud. In all, he had defrauded the companies of £580. Marley said he didn't consider it dishonest at the time, because he wanted some money. On the 28th of January 1941, Marley got his hands on 529 pairs of spectacle frames on an American ship. Within a few days he had sold them to an optometrist. In April 1941, Marley was among 5 wharf labourers who stole a roll of sheet lead from a naval vessel. Marley got 12 months and was declared an habitual criminal. His next heist was on a clothing shop in Newcastle on the 12th of October 1942. His haul was 87 ladies' overcoats, 41 ladies' costumes and 21 ladies' two-piece frocks, valued at £400. In court, Marley was described as a bird of passage with no fixed abode, to which Marley replied in a friendly tone, "That's not true. I'm a married man with 2 children and have work to go to on the wharves." Marley had married Odell Rose Shippick in 1938. His solicitor added that Marley was a member of the Waterside Workers' Union and had worked in Sydney, Port Kembla and Newcastle. While out on bail in January 1943, Marley assaulted and robbed a rigger named Henry James Taylor of £19. He had won at a dice game at a sports club. Taylor had gone and eaten a hamburger near the club, then caught a tram home. He noticed another man he knew as Big Jim and another man he didn't know were on the tram. When they got off at Tyers Hill, they followed and caught up to him. Big Jim held Taylor while Marley punched and kicked him and took the money. In February, Marley was acquitted of the clothing robbery, having said he hurt his back at that time and was unable to leave home. Although Taylor had been offered money to square the case, the assault and robbery charge proceeded in April 1943. Taylor had identified 33-year-old Marley at a 10-man lineup, but Marley was extremely fortunate in that 2 other men, John Sheehan, 22, a seaman, and John McHugh, 25, a labourer, came forward and said that it was they who had punched Taylor because he was molesting a girl and they couldn't abide Marley for going to jail for something they had done. Marley was acquitted, and the other 2 never faced trial. By 1944, Marley and his family had relocated to Richmond, Victoria, where he found work as a dockyard painter. On the 5th of July 1944, he and his wife had dined with 2 women from Sydney at the Hotel Australia. One of the women, Louise Sherry, had first met Marley 6 years earlier in Sydney. Marley had later returned to the hotel and had Mrs. Sherry paged to the lobby. While she was away, he had broken into the woman's room and stolen a brooch, fur coat and clothing worth £160. She saw him coming down the stairs as she returned to her room. Marley claimed he had gone to Mrs. Sherry's room to tell her that an affair they had been conducting must cease. She had given him the brooch and clothing, he said. The jury could not agree and a mistrial was ruled. A lot happened before a new trial could begin. Ivan Patrick Laidlaw was no angel. Born in 1910 in Queenstown, Tasmania, he got into trouble with the law his entire adult life, which came to a conclusion on the night of the 29th of October 1944, when he was aged 34. He was no angel, but apparently he did become a ghost. When he was convicted of breaking and entering in January 1933, he admitted it was not his first conviction. At 4 p.m. on the 9th of December 1937, he and 2 other men were in the Lemon Tree Hotel in Grattan Street, Carlton. The licensee, Ivy Conway, had gone to answer the telephone. When she returned, a bottle of gin was missing from behind the bar. One of the other men returned it. Later, Laidlaw threw 4 pint glasses around the bar, smashing them, before he broke a bottle of gin and 2 bottles of whisky. To finish, he spat in Ivy's face. When arrested later, he remarked, "You're putting me away for £2? Next time it'll be £50 damage." Laidlaw asked for time to pay the fine and costs of £5, but the unimpressed magistrate replied, "You've had your day's outing." Laidlaw was jointly charged with Leon Bazin for larceny in February 1938. Laidlaw got 6 months for the crime, while Bazin, a wharf labourer and former amateur boxer, was acquitted at the judge's direction. In 1941, Laidlaw was sentenced to 2 months' jail for selling tins of tobacco, which was actually sawdust, a common trick during the days of wartime rationing. In November 1943, he got 3 months for consorting. He was known to associate with shady figures like Bazin, Norman Bradshaw, and Freddie the Frog Harrison. Like Marley, he had a reputation for violence from activities which never reached public notice. The end of October was a bad week for Paddy Laidlaw. While walking along Wellington Street, Collingwood, on the night of the 24th of October 1944, a car drew up behind him and he felt a sharp pain. He had been shot twice. He walked to St. Vincent's Hospital, and two .22 caliber bullets were found, one in his left shoulder and the other close to his spine. When detectives arrived at the hospital to interview him, he said he thought somebody had thrown rocks at him and had no idea who would have shot him. Laidlaw shrugged off the effects of being shot, and 5 days later attended a beer party involving 5 men and 2 women at 22 Goodwood Street, near Lennox Street, Richmond, on the 29th of October 1944. Roy Marley provided 24 bottles of beer, courtesy of a sly grog operation, which would deliver beer by car at £3 5s a dozen. At about 6:30 p.m, the Nilsson family, George, Joyce and 2 children, who had been renting the front rooms at the property for a fortnight, were having dinner after a day at the zoo, when they heard an argument between Laidlaw and a woman with a Scottish accent. Marley entered the room and asked what was going on. Then a shot was heard. 4 men were seen to run from the property to a car and drive away. George Nilsson saw Marley walk from the room to the laundry carrying a gun. Then Marley was seen to return to the room, and 2 further shots were heard. The Nilssons hastily left the kitchen, George glancing back to see a man's body on the floor near the door. When police went to the back of the house, they found Laidlaw dead in a room littered with empty beer and whisky bottles, and heavy with smoke. His body was slumped in a chair at the head of a table. Laidlaw had been shot with a .45 caliber Colt pistol of the type issued to US servicemen. The murder weapon was recovered from a hedge on the opposite side of Goodwood Road by police, wrapped in newspaper, with 6 loose cartridges. One report said Laidlaw's chest had been blown away, and that bullet holes riddled the wall. The bullet which is said to have killed him struck the man in the chin and passed out the back of his head. Within 2 days, Marley was charged with murder, and the occupant of the house, Mrs. Jean Alice Evans, aged 25, with being an accessory to the fact. When he appeared in court on the 31st of October, Marley's right arm was bandaged and in a sling. He indicated he would seek permission to attend the funeral of his dear departed friend, Paddy Laidlaw. When asked what had happened, Marley said he didn't know. He'd been having a nap in another room when it happened. He said the men who ran off were US sailors. There was also said to have been an Air Force man and a minor criminal named Stuart Coyle, who, like Laidlaw, had been arrested more than once selling tins of sawdust as tobacco. He tried to blame one of the sailors, but was told he'd been seen holding the gun. "That's a deliberate lie. I've never had a gun in my life," the indignant gunman retorted. Then he altered his story to say that he had entered the room to find Laidlaw holding a woman by her hair with one hand and the gun in the other. Marley bravely took the gun off Laidlaw, but sadly the weapon went off as he did so. And then as he stepped back, he tripped on the fireplace, and it appeared Laidlaw was coming at him with scissors when it accidentally went off for a second time. There was a cigarette, but found in the dead man's right hand, between his second and third fingers. Mute testimony that he was not grappling with a gun before he died. Marley also said that Laidlaw had shown him the gun earlier, saying he'd been down to the docks and bought it off a Yank. Laidlaw gave it to Marley to mine for him, and he met him at a two-up school earlier in the day and returned it. At the trial in December 1944, Marley maintained that the shooting was accidental. The jury retired for just 20 minutes and returned to acquit him. Having evaded justice, probably by buying off the jury or frightening them, Marley now became emboldened even further. If he menaced anyone, he had the added threat that he could inform them that if he could beat one murder rap, he could beat another. He, along with Mrs. Evans and another man named Gordon King, stole £3 from Ian Howe on the 26th of January 1945. On the 23rd of February 1945, he visited the hairdresser's salon operated by Joan Taylor in Richmond and asked for £25. She told him that she didn't have that amount, but Marley was insistent. He was so insistent that he threatened to throw her through the plate glass window of the shop. She gave him £4, which he returned, but she insisted he take it. She was mindful that he kept his hands in his pockets, and she had previously seen him with a gun. He was fined £10 for the robbery of the hairdresser and for consorting with thieves. In April, the long-delayed robbery of Louise Sherry was back before the courts. 4 waterside workers backed up Marley's claim that he was given the property, but this time he was convicted. The judge declared the others had committed perjury and remarked that, with that type supporting you, no wonder there is a good deal of pilfering at the wharves. Marley was given 2 years with hard labour. He was at large again in September 1946. He and a man named Theodore Black, aged 31, hailed a taxi in Melbourne and asked to be driven to St Kilda. On the way, one of them put his hand in his coat pocket and said if the driver wanted to stay healthy, to do what he was told. Ordered to drive back to Melbourne, he did so, but on spotting 2 policemen, he pulled the cab up next to them. Black threw away a pistol into the street before the passengers hastened to leave, but were apprehended. Marley was found to be carrying a loaded automatic pistol and a knuckle duster. He was charged with loitering with intent to commit a felony, being a convicted felon in possession of a pistol, being armed by night with an offensive weapon, and being in possession of an unregistered pistol. Marley decided some time out of Victoria might be appropriate, and made a trip west to Perth. Once there, he was employed on the waterfront, and of course where he was soon arrested. He and a clerk named James Halvey were found with £400 worth of furs from an £1,800 fur robbery on the 27th of November 1946. On the 29th of November, between 6:30 and 7:15 a.m, Marley and another man named John Nash, aged 24, sawed through steel bars covering the exercise yard at the Perth lockup and fled across a roof and down a 15-foot drop at the rear of the building. Another prisoner named James Simmons, who helped the pair escape, said he was promised £300 for his assistance by Marley. Marley managed to get away and catch a plane to Melbourne, but police were alerted to his arrival and were waiting for him. After a short chase from the TAA office in Lonsdale Street, he was captured on the night of the 6th of December 1946 by 3 detectives. Nash was apprehended in Fremantle the same day. Marley was returned by plane to Perth, arriving on the 10th of May 1947. When in court for the escape, he pleaded guilty but claimed provocation. He said he had come to Perth to see a friend who could utilise some of the music he had written. He was later charged with having stolen 5 wireless sets from his friend. The humiliation of knowing I have been accused of stealing from the man I had come over to see, and the fact that my mother was ill in Hobart affected my escape. He pleaded not to be sent to Fremantle Jail, which he said was a home of degenerates, mental and otherwise. The magistrate looked at Marley's record and sent him away for 6 months, backdated to start on the 9th of May. His trial for stealing the furs began later the same day. He got 2 years to be served cumulatively. At a failed appeal in July, Marley, with hand upraised, said on the day of the fur theft, "On that Sunday I stayed in my room, and I swear before the Holy Mary that I did." Following his release from jail in Western Australia, Marley returned to Tasmania. He was sentenced to 4 months for vagrancy and indecent language in April 1949. On his return to Melbourne, he was fined £10 for assaulting a policeman. Then he was arrested with Neville Bates for breaking and entering at Carlton on the 9th of September 1949. Bates was renting a room from a Mrs. Meehan, who found him and Marley with goods she believed were stolen. When she threatened to call police, Bates knocked her down, and when she fled into the passage he hit her down again, and then put the boot in. Bates received 2 years in July 1950. At the end of 1950, Marley took another man who'd been injured in a brawl to Prince Henry Hospital. While there, he drew a fully loaded pistol on 2 policemen, who managed to overpower him and take the weapon. The final bizarre act in Marley's life took place on the 22nd of June 1950. Headlines in newspapers proclaimed he had been haunted by the ghost of Paddy Laidlaw, having apparently mentioned this to some associates. Due to this, he procured some tablets used to poison dogs, and killed himself in an upstairs bedroom at Brunswick Street, Fitzroy. Was a ghost the reason he had ended his life? He was due to appear in court over shop-breaking the day he died, and if convicted could have been jailed for the 15th time, which some thought was more likely as a reason. Yet he'd been inside before, and it wasn't the most serious charge he had ever faced. His lawyer was a young Frank Galbally, who later went on to defend other waterside workers linked to the underworld in the 1950s and 60s. He was also on bail at the time while appealing a 6-month sentence for carrying the pistol he had threatened the police with at Prince Henry Hospital. Perhaps the real reason for his suicide was a woman. Her name was Corrie Bacillop. Marley was staying at the house of Henry Hardy, whom he told on the night of the 21st of June. If I can't see Corrie, life is not worth living without her. Marley had returned from trying to see her, but had failed. Hardy witnessed Marley swallow several yellow capsules from a bottle, washed down with wine at 6:30 a.m. on the morning of the 22nd of June, and go purple in the face. Until then, Hardy thought he'd been joking. Corrie worked as a wardswoman at Royal Melbourne Hospital and had met Marley unaware of his life as a gunman. When she found out, she broke off the relationship. She refused to visit the Fitzroy house and talk things over that last night. When Marley had purchased the poison, he also bought a bottle of chloroform. It was theorised later that he intended to have the talk with Corrie, and if she rebuffed him, then he planned to use the chloroform to knock her out and then stuff some of the pills down her throat in a murder-suicide. Despite all that was publicly revealed, there was a lot that went concealed. Police considered Marley to be a dangerous criminal, and following his death, newspapers weren't shy to proclaim that he was one of Victoria's most vicious standover men. He had been a frequent visitor to Brisbane, particularly during the war years, and is believed to have committed crimes there too. A lot of people breathed easier in Melbourne that Marley was out of the way. He had levied tolls on the SP bookies, sly groggers and gambling dens. It was said even the bodyguard of the biggest supplier of dope in Melbourne paid off Marley as health insurance. Roy Marley's body was returned to Tasmania and cremated in Hobart. It had been a tumultuous 41 years that he had lived.